Richard Hawthorne hadn't missed a single visit in 3 years. Every 14th day of the month, rain or shine, he came alone. No driver, no bodyguard, no excuse. Just a man in a black suit standing before a small white stone that read, "Emma Hawthorne, forever loved." 4 words. That was all he'd managed to put on the grave of the most important person in his life. Today, the sky had turned the color of ash. Rain fell hard and cold across Greenwood Cemetery. The grass was soaked. The flowers he'd placed last month were flattened and brown. He stood there the way he always did, still, silent, controlled. The way powerful men hide when they are breaking. Then something made him stop breathing. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. Behind him, footsteps, small ones, slow and uneven, pressing softly through the wet grass. He turned. A little girl in a soaked white dress stood at the edge of the path, shaking, mud on her knees, a cut above her brow. His daughter's eyes, staring straight at him. Her lips moved. "Dad, it's me." Richard didn't answer, but his hands, the hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without blinking, began to tremble. Because the fear on his face wasn't disbelief. It was the look of a man who suddenly realized that the secret he had buried 3 years ago had just walked back out of the ground. Richard didn't move. The girl was still standing there, shaking, soaked, staring at him with those eyes. But his mind had already left the cemetery. It had gone somewhere else, somewhere 3 years back. To the night everything ended. The plane went down on a Tuesday. Richard remembered every detail. The way the sky looked dark blue turning black over the Atlantic. The way Emma had fallen asleep in the leather seat across from him, her small shoes barely touching the floor. The way she had asked for apple juice before takeoff, even though she was old enough to ask for anything else. She always asked for apple juice. He remembered the sound. Not an explosion, not at first. Just a deep, wrong shudder through the body of the jet. Then the lights. Then the drop. Then nothing. He woke up in the water. Coast Guard found him 40 minutes later, clinging to a piece of the wing. He had a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a cut across his palm from something sharp in the wreckage. Emma was never found. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. The official report said, mechanical failure, a fuel system malfunction, a tragic accident, the kind of thing that happens sometimes, even to the best aircraft, even to the most careful men. Richard read that report once, closed it, and never opened it again. Because he knew it was wrong. He had felt it before the plane ever left the ground. The way one of the crew members had avoided his eyes at the gate. The phone call he received 20 minutes into the flight, a voice he recognized, a man named Victor Crane, saying 3 words before the line went dead. "It's been handled." Richard had not understood what that meant. Until the shudder, until the drop, until the black water. By the time he understood, Emma was already gone. He told no one, not his lawyers, not the police, not his board of directors, not Emma's mother, who had already left the country by then, too shattered to stay. He told no one because Victor Crane had made something very clear in the weeks that followed. A quiet meeting, a manila envelope slid across a table, documents that could send Richard to prison, real or forged, it didn't matter. Crane had smiled and said, "Grief looks better on you than a trial would." So Richard carried it alone. Every 14th day of the month, he came to this cemetery. He stood at this stone. He paid the debt in silence, the only way he was allowed to. That was his life now. That was the deal he had made. He turned back toward the girl, still trembling in the rain, still watching him with those familiar eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, Richard Hawthorne felt the deal starting to break. Richard's jaw tightened. He had built an empire by reading people fast, board members, rivals, lawyers who smiled too wide. He knew within seconds whether someone was telling the truth or performing it. He looked at the girl. Then he looked past her. The cemetery was empty. No car parked at the gate. No figure watching from the tree line. Just rain and wet grass and this small, shaking child standing where no child should be. His hand moved to his jacket pocket, to his phone. "Who sent you?" His voice came out low and flat, the voice he used in rooms where millions of dollars were on the table. Controlled, cold, final. The girl blinked. Rain ran down her forehead and into her eyes. She didn't wipe it away. "Nobody sent me," she said quietly. "I came by myself." "That's not an answer." He took one step toward her. "Who paid you to come here? What do they want?" She didn't step back. That surprised him. "I don't want anything," she said. I needed to find you." Richard studied her, really looked at her, the way he hadn't allowed himself to a moment ago. She was thin, too thin. Her arms were pale and bony beneath the soaked white dress. There was a scar along her left collarbone, jagged, old, the kind that came from something serious. She was favoring her right leg, the left one barely bending at the knee when she shifted her weight. Her hair was tangled and dark with rain. Her shoes, if they could be called that, were falling apart at the soles. She was not a prop someone had polished and planted. But that didn't matter. "You know my name," he said. "How?" "Because you're my." "You know Emma's name." He cut her off. "You know this grave, you know this row." He shook his head slowly. "Someone told you exactly where to stand and exactly what to say, and they chose today because they knew I'd be here." The girl's expression didn't break, but something moved behind her eyes, something that looked less like a lie and more like pain. "Emma Rose Hawthorne," she said softly. "She died on October 14th, 3 years ago. The grave is in row 7, near the oak tree on the left, because you wanted her to have shade in the summer." Richard went still. That last part. He had never told anyone that, not his assistant who arranged the burial plot, not the groundskeeper, not a single person alive. He had simply chosen it, quietly, alone. His thumb hovered over the phone screen. "Call Marcus, get her removed, get this contained." That was the smart move, the safe move, the move he always made. His thumb didn't press the button. "Keep talking," he said instead. And the rain kept falling between them, heavy and cold, washing something loose that 3 years had tried to keep buried. His thumb still hadn't moved. The phone was in his hand. Marcus was one button away. One call and this would be over, the girl removed, the situation contained, the cemetery quiet again. Then she spoke. "You have a scar on your right palm." Richard didn't breathe. "You got it when I was 5. There was a window in the beach house, the old one, the one you sold after Mom left. A storm cracked it and it fell. You caught it with your bare hand so it wouldn't hit me." She paused. "You told me not to tell Mom. You said she'd worry too much and make you sleep on the couch." The phone dropped to his side. Slowly, the way a man moves when his body stops trusting his mind, Richard looked down at his right hand. At the pale, thin line running diagonally across his palm. The one he'd had for so long he barely noticed it anymore. Nobody knew that story. Not Emma's mother. Not his housekeeper who had worked for him for 15 years. Not a single person on earth had ever heard it, because it was the kind of small, quiet moment that only 2 people share and never think to write down. He looked up at the girl. "Keep going," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. She took a small breath, like she was preparing, like she had been saving these words for a long time and needed to be careful with them. "Your jet had blue leather seats, not dark blue, lighter than that, the kind that felt cold in the morning before the cabin warmed up." She looked at her hands as she spoke, like she was reading something only she could see. "There was a cabinet near the window on the left side. It had a wooden chess set inside. The pieces were heavy, carved ones. You never actually played chess with me, but I liked opening the cabinet and touching them." Richard's chest tightened. "And every time we flew anywhere," she continued, her voice dropping quieter, "you told the flight attendant to bring me apple juice. Every time. even when I told you I was old enough for something else." A small, broken sound caught in her throat. "You always said I could choose anything I wanted when I was grown, but for now, apple juice." Richard couldn't speak. The details were perfect. Not close perfect. The chest set, the color of the leather, the exact words he used, in the exact tone he used them on every single flight they had ever taken together. His denial hadn't just cracked. It had collapsed completely. But what rose up in its place wasn't relief. It was something colder, something that moved through him like ice water finding every crack. Because if this girl truly remembered the jet, she remembered everything about that flight, including the part that happened right before the end. Richard asked the only question left. "How did you survive?" The girl was quiet for a moment. The rain had softened slightly, still falling, but gentler now. She lowered herself onto the wet grass beside the gravestone, like her leg had been holding out as long as it could and finally needed rest. He didn't stop her, he just waited. "I don't remember the explosion," she said. "Not really. I remember the sound the plane made, that horrible shaking. And I remember the window next to my seat. It was open a little, and then I was in the water." She pulled her knees to her chest. "I washed up on an island, a small one, I don't even know the name of it. A fishing family found me on the beach in the morning. They thought I was dead." She paused. "I almost was." Richard looked at her leg, at the scar on her collarbone. He understood now where they had come from. "They took care of me," she continued. "They didn't speak much English, but they were kind. They fed me and kept me warm and never once made me feel like a burden." Her voice was steady, but her hands were tight around her knees. "For a long time I didn't know who I was. No name, no memory, just feelings, like shadows of things I used to know." "When did it come back?" "Slowly, faces first, then your voice, then my name." She looked up at him. "It took almost 2 years before I remembered enough to start looking for you." Richard nodded. His throat felt thick. "I'm glad they found you," he said quietly, and he meant it in a way that hurt. The girl nodded too, then she went still. Something in her expression shifted, like she had reached the part of the story she had been carrying the longest, the part that weighed the most. "Dad," she said softly, "before the plane fell, I heard something." The cold moved through him instantly. "You were on your phone near the back of the cabin. You thought I was asleep." She kept her eyes on his, steady, careful. "A man's voice came through the phone. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard him say 3 words. She paused. "It's been handled." The cemetery disappeared. 3 years dissolved. Richard was back on that plane, standing at the rear of the cabin, phone pressed to his ear, Victor Crane's voice coming through calm and quiet and final. It's been handled. And Richard had gone completely still, because in that moment he hadn't known what it meant. He hadn't known. But Emma had heard it. "You went very quiet after that," she said, and then the shaking started. Richard stared at his daughter. His face had gone the color of the gravestone beside her. And for the first time since she appeared out of the rain, he could not find a single word to say. Richard made his decision in under 10 seconds. That was how he had always worked. Strip the emotion, see the facts, move. "Can you walk?" The girl looked up at him, a little. "I'm going to carry you to my car. Don't argue." She didn't argue. He lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, which made something deep in his chest ache, and walked quickly through the wet grass toward the cemetery gates. His mind was already 3 steps ahead of his body. She needed a hospital. That was real and urgent and simple. Everything else was complicated. At the emergency entrance, a nurse with a clipboard rushed forward. Richard kept his voice calm and even. "I found her near the cemetery on Greenwood Road. She was alone, injured in the rain. I don't know who she belongs to." He looked at the nurse directly. "I'd like her seen immediately." The nurse looked at the girl, at the scar, at the leg. She stopped asking questions and started moving. Richard stayed close, close enough to watch, close enough to make sure she didn't disappear again. While a doctor examined her behind a curtain, Richard stepped into the hallway. He pulled out his phone, not to call Marcus this time. He called a different number, one most people never got. It rang once. "Sir," the voice was quiet and precise. "Thomas Bale, head of security for Hawthorne Group for 11 years, a man who solved problems before they became headlines." "I need you to run a name," Richard said, his voice barely above a murmur. "Victor Crane." Silence for exactly one beat. "All of it?" Bale asked. "Everything he's done in the past 3 years, every company he's touched, every person connected to him." Richard paused. "And I need to know if he's been watching me." Another short silence. This related to the cemetery. Richard said nothing. Bale understood. "I'll have something within the hour." The call ended. Richard stood in the white hospital hallway and stared at the floor. Victor Crane, the name he had not said out loud in 3 years. The man who had handed him that envelope, who had smiled across that table and made grief sound like a business arrangement. Crane had let the silence continue because it protected him, because Richard's shame kept Crane safe. But now the silence had a crack in it. Emily was alive. Emily had heard that phone call, and if Crane found out, if he learned that a surviving witness had just walked out of 3 years of shadows and straight to Richard's side, she wouldn't be safe. Not for a single day. Richard looked back at the curtain where his daughter lay. The girl he had come to the cemetery to mourn had just become the most dangerous person in Crane's world. And the only thing standing between her and that danger was a man who had already failed her once. The doctor's name was Patel. He was calm, efficient, and kind in the way that good emergency physicians learn to be. He cleaned the cut above Emily's brow, examined her leg, an old fracture, poorly healed, and ordered a full panel of blood work without being asked. Then he looked at Richard. "We should notify the police. A child this age, unaccompanied with injuries like these," he kept his voice neutral. "It's standard protocol." "Of course," Richard said. He had expected this. He had already decided how to handle it. What he had not expected was which detective would walk through the door 40 minutes later. She was small, not much taller than Emily, with sharp eyes and a dark jacket that had seen too many long shifts. She moved through the hospital corridor like someone who had been in too many hospitals to be unsettled by them. She showed her badge to the nurse at the desk. Then she looked down the hallway and found Richard immediately, the way people with good instincts always find the most powerful person in a room. "Mr. Hawthorne." No warmth, no performance, just the name. "Detective Sophia Reyes, I'd like to speak with the girl first, then you." Richard nodded once. She was in with Emily for 22 minutes. Richard counted. When Reyes came back out, her expression had not changed, but something behind her eyes had sharpened. "Your turn," she said simply. They stood in a small family consultation room at the end of the hall. No chairs taken. Both of them standing. Richard recognized it as a deliberate choice on her part. She asked him to describe finding the girl. He did calmly, clearly, every detail in order. She asked him twice about the timeline. He answered the same way both times. She wrote nothing down. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mr. Hawthorne, I've been reinvestigating the crash that killed your daughter for the past 2 years." Richard kept his face still. A tip suggested the mechanical failure report may have been incomplete. She watched him the way a person watches a door they expect to open. "I haven't had enough to move on it, until today." "I'm not sure what today changes," Richard said carefully. "A girl matching your daughter's description survives 3 years alone and surfaces at your family's grave." Reyes tilted her head slightly. "That changes the geometry of everything." She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. "We've ordered a DNA test. Results in 48 hours. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Hawthorne, if your daughter survived, there's a reason she survived alone. Someone made choices the night that plane went down." She looked back at him. "I intend to find out what those choices were." She left. Richard stood in the empty room. Two forces now, Crane on one side, Ray's on the other. And Emily asleep down the hall, caught directly in the middle. The results came back at 11:14 in the morning. A nurse handed Dr. Patel a single printed sheet. He read it once, then walked to the small office at the end of the ward and made the call he was legally required to make. By 11:16, Detective Ray's had the number. By 1:30 in the afternoon, it had leaked. Richard found out from Thomas Bale, who sent a single text, "It's out." He turned on the television in the hospital waiting room. His own face stared back at him from the screen, an old photo, taken at some gala 3 years ago. Beside it, Emma's school photograph, the one from the year she died. The headline beneath them read, "Billionaire's dead daughter alive." Within the hour, every major network had the story. By evening, it was the only story. Anchors who usually discussed markets and politics sat forward in their chairs and spoke in lowered voices, the way people do when something feels too large to be real. 99.97%. Richard turned the television off. His phone rang at 6:52 p.m. Unknown number. He knew before he answered. "Congratulations." Victor Crane's voice was smooth and unhurried, the way it always was, the voice of a man who had never once been caught. "A miracle. You must be overwhelmed." Richard said nothing. "She's a child, Richard. Children talk. They say things they don't realize they're saying." A short pause. "You need to control this, what she remembers, what she tells people, how much access that detective gets." Another pause, longer this time. "Or I will handle it myself." The line went dead. Richard sat completely still. "I will handle it myself." 3 years ago, those words had meant a plane going down over the Atlantic. They had meant Emma disappearing into cold black water. They had meant a small girl washing up alone on an island with nothing but scars and broken memory. Handle it. Richard looked down at the scar on his right palm. He stood up, walked down the corridor, pushed open the door to Emily's room. She was asleep. Her breathing was slow and even. Someone had found her a clean blanket, pale yellow, too large for her small frame. Her face in sleep looked younger than it did awake. The tension gone, just a child. Just his child. Richard sat in the chair beside her bed. He didn't move for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket, took out his phone. He found the number Detective Ray's had left him. His thumb hovered. He thought about his empire, his board, his lawyers, everything he had spent 20 years building. Then he looked at Emily. He pressed call. "Detective Ray's," he said quietly when she answered. "I need to tell you something, all of it, tonight." Detective Ray's arrived at the hospital at 8:15 p.m. She brought no recorder, no partner. Just a notepad, and the kind of stillness that told Richard she had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. He talked for 90 minutes. He told her about Crane, about the financial fraud Richard had uncovered, money moved through shell companies, investors quietly destroyed, evidence buried under layers of paperwork designed to confuse anyone who got too close. He told her how he had gone to Crane directly, privately, before involving lawyers. How Crane had listened, nodded, and then arranged for Richard's jet to fall into the Atlantic 3 days later. He told her about the envelope, the forged documents, the meeting where Crane had explained, very calmly, exactly what silence was worth. He told her he had paid that price. For 3 years. Ray's wrote steadily throughout. She asked sharp, precise questions. She never raised her voice. But near the end, she set her pen down and looked at him directly. "You protected him," she said. Not an accusation, just a fact laid flat on the table between them. "Yes," Richard said. "While your daughter was alive somewhere." He didn't flinch from it. "Yes." Ray's picked her pen back up. "I'll need everything. Documents, dates, names, the original evidence you found on Crane's fraud." She closed the notepad. "Don't leave the city." Victor Crane was arrested at 7:40 the following morning. The press conference was Richard's lawyer's idea. Get ahead of the story. Control the message. Richard agreed, but not for the reasons they thought. The room was crowded and loud and bright with cameras. Richard stood at the podium in a dark suit, no notes, no prepared statement. Behind the gathered press, near the back wall, Emily sat in a wheelchair, still wearing her hospital clothes. A nurse stood beside her. She had insisted on coming. Richard had not argued. He said what needed to be said about Crane, about the sabotage, about 3 years of silence. Then a reporter near the front raised her hand. "Mr. Hawthorne, did you know your daughter might still be alive somewhere? Did you choose to say nothing?" The room went very quiet. Richard looked up from the podium, past the cameras, past the reporters, straight to the back of the room. Emily was watching him, her hands folded in her lap, her face open and still, not angry, not afraid, just watching, waiting for the truth the way a child waits for something they have needed for a very long time. "No," Richard said clearly. "I did not know she was alive." He held Emily's gaze. "But I knew someone wanted her dead, and I chose my reputation over justice." His voice didn't break. He wouldn't let it. Not here. Not yet. "I will spend the rest of my life making that right." The cameras kept flashing. Emily didn't look away. 3 months later, the walls of Emma's room were sky blue. Not dark blue. Not navy. The exact shade she had described on the island when her memory was still returning in pieces, when she couldn't yet remember her own last name, but somehow remembered the color she had always wanted her room to be. Richard had shown her 3 paint samples. She pointed to the right one without hesitating. The window faced east. On clear nights you could see stars. She slept through the night now, most of the time. Richard's legal team called it the best possible outcome. Obstruction charges, guilty plea, fines that were large by any normal measure and manageable by his, probation, no prison. His empire survived, smaller, quieter, restructured. 2 board members resigned. 3 major contracts walked away. He let them go without argument. What remained was still substantial, but it no longer felt like the most important thing he owned. The foundation's opening was held on a Tuesday. The building was modest, a converted community center with clean rooms, warm lighting, and walls painted in soft colors chosen by the first group of children who would sleep there. Richard had approved every detail and then stepped back, because it was not his name on the door that mattered. It was hers. Emma stood at the podium in a pale blue dress, her hair brushed and neat, her left leg still carrying the faintest trace of a limp that the doctors said might never fully leave. She looked out at the gathered crowd, journalists, donors, social workers, and families, and for a moment she simply breathed. She was small behind that podium. The microphone was too tall. Someone had placed a small step beneath it without being asked. "My dad made a mistake," she said. Her voice shook on the first word and steadied after it. "A bad one, the kind that hurt a lot of people." She paused. But when it was hardest, when telling the truth cost the most, he told it anyway. Richard sat in the front row, hands folded, back straight. "He came back for me," Emma continued, "even if it took him 3 years. She looked at him directly, the way she had in that press conference, open, clear, and chosen. "That's what I want this foundation to do, come back for the ones everyone forgot." The room was completely silent. Then it wasn't. Richard didn't reach for composure this time. He didn't measure the moment or manage it. He simply let it happen, his daughter's voice, the applause, the tears moving down his face unchecked. Afterward, he stood for a long time before the foundation's wall of photographs. Children helped, children found. Near the bottom corner, one photograph had no name beneath it. A quiet child with gentle eyes, photographed on a small island, standing at the edge of the water, looking toward the horizon like someone waiting to be remembered. Emma appeared beside him. "That's him," she said softly. "He found me on the beach. He stayed with me for weeks before he disappeared." She looked up at Richard. "I never learned his name." Richard studied the small, nameless face. Then he looked at his daughter. "We'll find him," he said. And this time, he meant it before the debt came due. Thanks for staying with this story. Right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down.